The Sacrificial Dagger, Otto Stern, Lumina Books.
The importance placed on ritual sacrifice is constant in religious cult practice. Propitiating the gods is a theme common to many religions. The Old Testament affords many examples. Primitive polytheistic belief systems integrate sacrifice in their rituals as part of the recurrent process of reaffirmation and, naturally enough, group cohesion. The members of their social and religious The importance placed on ritual sacrifice is constant in religious cult. The members of their social and religious community come together in an act of purification and atonement. It would be erroneous to imagine the act of human sacrifice linking priest, offering, and God, C.F. Manzetti, stone cults, as anything less than a vital focusing of the group's faith. The act also ensures the continuing appeasement of the god, but only if practiced by a recognized officiating priest using the appropriate instrument. Studies made concerning primitive religious groups bear witness to the central role of sacrifice in living ritual. My own work in the field of ethnopsychology brought me into contact with a sorcerer living in the region of Arkham. He introduced me to the rite of steel, linked to a ceremony known as adoring the black goat of the woods with 1,000 youngs. The god being adored is known as the vagabond. Here, the dagger's role, which allows the life breath to pass from one dimension to another, is essential. The vagabond is a frightening figure, being able to move where he wants and to kill those who have displeased the goat god, for whom he acts as a go-between. The goat is clearly a fertility god. The priest, having spoken the invocation, must choose the appropriate dagger for the sacrifice. The knife with a sinusoidal blade that must be dipped 7 times, on night when the moon is full, in water that has been distilled 100 times, will be laid aside, since it would send the vagabond back into his own dimension. See illustration. The priest will rather choose the dagger with a curved blade. That is more appropriate for slitting of the lamb's throat. This act transfigures the sorcerer priest and plunges the assembled worshippers into a divine trance.
The Book of Yael, Signs of Stone, Eucharistic Rituals of Forbidden Cults. Texts collated by Monsignor Vacher, legate in the Curia of the Vatican.
Numerous devilish cults speak of monstrous creatures called the Old Ones. These supernatural beings are believed to be possessed of powers equivalent to those of the gods of antique religions. Adepts of such cults refer to forbidden literature in order to cause these frightful entities to appear before them. What serious student of folk myths has not come across the names of Cthulhu and Shub-Niggurath? It must be said that these creatures wield tremendous power and are difficult to control once they have been unleashed into the world. Those who serve He who goes in shadows protect themselves with signs of stone, carved into the walls of houses or engraved on various objects. For those misguided servants of evil, the best protection appears to be that afforded by the sign of the most ancient gods, engraved in manar stone, a heavy material said to be disagreeable to the touch. The sinful practices of those who fall into such errors can only lead to the darkest of despair, and are a mortal danger to the soul. Such monsters as those invoked by these foolhardy individuals are engendered when reason drops its guard. Man is easily tempted into perversion. It is why we must forever remain alert and renounce Satan with each breath we take. His ways are infinite in number.
Fragments of the Book of Abdul.
In the antique city of dead Relia, Cthulhu dreams and waits. In the pit of time, the unspeakable lies in wait. That is not dead which can eternal lie. Relia, your blocks of stone seal the ritual that gives birth to fear. Cthulhu Fatang! Cthulhu Fatang! Ayah! Ayah! Let he who knows how to invoke the stones act. It is time. Let the shadow of Cthulhu darken the sky. May the servitor of the black goat of the woods with 1,000 youngs sound his flute in honor of the unspeakable. Cthulhu Fatang! Cthulhu Fatang! Ayah! Ayah! May he who may not be named cast his withering gaze upon the unbeliever, for he is the door, the key, and the guardian of the door, and holds you now in his immense power.
If Rocks Could Talk, or The Story of a Louisiana Plantation, by the Marquise de Chamfray.
After the criminal selling off of Florida by the foul usurper, my father elected to remain in this inhospitable land, where we were free at least to express our royalist feelings, and hope our country would come to its senses. In 1818, a certain Pickford bought up Ledoux's land, after the poor fellow had ruined himself in unfortunate speculation. Pickford soon turned out to be the most loathsome human we had ever encountered. He was an adventurer of the worst kind, nouveau riche, and bloated with a grotesque sense of self-importance. First came the incessant army of men with shovels, digging into the mountain of earth that was to fill in the surrounding swamp. The undertaking was quite stupendous. We learned from a slave that the final objective was to connect the existing caves with another one of gigantic proportions. Racked by a mania of persecution, Elia Pickford constantly fired his workers and hired new ones. He did all he could to keep anyone from learning about his plans. My father was amused and said, "The poor fool will end up getting lost in his own cave." But the walls went up, and tongues started wagging. Our detestable neighbor had been a sailor, a ruffian grown rich on questionable trade. Distasteful stories were told of him. When the work was finished, Pickford invited us to the opening of his rambling mansion, which he named Derceto. My father asked what the strange name meant. Pickford answered, "Derceto reminds me of Astarte, the fertility goddess. Around here, the name is Shub-Niggurath. I believe that a name so steeped in evil should be said aloud came as not such a shock to my father, as he himself confided in me some while later." We left immediately.
In June of 1862, Derceto was burned down in unexplained circumstances. It was undoubtedly the deed of some jealous Yankee or another. It was amazing to watch the servants rushing into the flames to try and save their bullet-riddled master. After that terrible night, Derceto fell into ruin. Its blackened walls were soon overgrown, as human-built works always are, by ever-present nature. In 1875, the property was eventually bought by a gentleman whose name was Howard Hartwood. I was sorry that my father, who delighted in fine conversation, was no longer alive to enjoy the company of this new neighbor. Learned and well-versed in history, he had made a particular study of piracy. It was Hartwood who told me that Pickford had commanded a ship that flew the flag of piracy. That explained the scoundrel's great wealth. Hartwood was fascinated by Pickford and undertook a great deal of research in an attempt to find some treasures that he was convinced the pirate had hidden. He went through the ruins inch by inch. He then had the burnt-out house rebuilt exactly as it had been, and refurbished the library that had miraculously escaped the flames on the night of the Great Fire. Hartwood set about studying every volume in that library, and often talked to me of his research. He was a handsome widower, deeply attached to his son Jeremy, who was later to become a professional artist. Hartwood worked incessantly, first from the room I offered him, then from his own freshly restored home, which he rebaptized Derceto. I imagine he hoped to enlist the help of the god of good fortune in his treasure hunt. As far as I have ever been able to tell, all his searching came to nothing. There were no lost treasure to be found at Derceto. I learned of Hartwood's death while I was in Paris. But that, as they say, is another story.
Unfinished Chapter of Terra Incognita by Jacob Van Ostate, a hitherto unpublished fragment of the manuscript unearthed following indications furnished in the Vatican Library's Expurgatory Index.
In those icy and unwelcoming lands, the rites of wizards and healers are deeply rooted in ancient legend. Mysterious and cruel beings are thought to have ruled over the Arctic plains in times past. A cursed city, enclosed by massive walls, is believed to stand to this day. It contains fabulous treasures and is inhabited by the degenerate descendants of those who instilled centuries of terror in the hearts of the people. These people, naturally placid, are seized with rage and horror at the very mention of the prisoners of the ice. Were these dreadful captives to be freed from their frozen cells, they would reap a horrifying tribute of human flesh. These blood-curdling beings may be invoked by certain ritual words. They can even be controlled, albeit with the greatest of difficulty. I admit to being impressed by these tales, repeated to me on many occasions and in a number of different places during my travels in the region. I have also seen troubling cult objects, sculpted in a material unknown to me. Another remarkable fact is that local Eskimos experience great distaste in pronouncing certain words, and invariably avoid saying them. Here is a living example of the power that words contain. As it is said in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word.
The Sons of the Sun and of the Shadows. Lieutenant Lope de Vega's account of his astounding travels to the land of the Aztecs.
"Holy Christ!" cried Captain Cortez, astonished by the strange rite we beheld. We found the savages half naked. They were throwing balls of silver and gold at each other. They laughed as if demented, clearly maddened by some heathen drug. And yet, should one of them fail to catch the ball thrown in his direction, the poor devil was seized and dragged off to be sacrificed in their temple. As we discovered, This frightful game was a ritual most holy to them, and symbolized the movement of the heavenly bodies. The dropping of a ball foretold a catastrophe. That is what the Aztecs believed, in their godless ignorance. Their countless deities could only be appeased through endless human sacrifices. The victim's heart, which was still beating, lay in the hand of the murderous priest. The interior of the temple was surprisingly cool. The weight of our armor, our exhaustion, even the burden of our suffering, they were all banished by a sense of awe that the crudely magnificent altar instilled. In the tomb-like silence, a deep voice chanted an incantation. The majestic statue of the water goddess, Chalchihuitlicue, seemed to throb with vitality. This massive stone, draped in a golden cloak and studded with precious stones, was coming to life before our very eyes. Horror of horrors! The granite eyes of the statue, empty of life only moments before, were now injected with blood. We staggered back in amazement. Dom Jose was taken by a fit of convulsions. He tried to raise up his crucifix, as if to ward off an attack by demons. The heathen priest laughed cruelly. The statue's mouth cracked open in a deathly grin, bearing teeth sharpened to dagger points. Captain Cortez cried, "Attack!" But it was no use. We were glued to the spot. We were unable to move. Our armor seemed to be bolted to the temple floor. Our legs weakened, and we collapsed in a thunder of steel. Only Cortez had the presence of mind to unsheath his dagger. He hurled it at the cackling priest. 4 inches of the finest Toledo steel buried itself in the heathen's face. His blood spurted, splashing the now lifeless idol. We picked ourselves up with difficulty. Never will I forget that terrible moment. My companions, naturally enough, told tales of devilish enchantments cast upon our armor. Whatever the truth of that, I could not deny that the supreme god of the 4th universe had treated us as mere playthings. I am convinced that a terrible energy is yet contained within that heathen statue. A power strong enough to change a proud conquistador into a helpless puppet. Drawing of Chalchihuitlicue by Dom Jose de la Sierra, done before the destruction of the Aztec temple of Tenochtitlan.
The Trial of Captain Preggst, as reported by his faithful companion Elisha Smith, known amongst his fraternity by the awful name of Captain Ellie Hell. Transcribed from the log found aboard the wreck of the frigate Astarte by H. Hartwood.
"By all the devils!" roared Preggst, glaring at William, the judge. "Curse it, Will! It'll take much more than every cannon in the blasted navy to make me change me mind. You're the greatest blackguard that ever joined our fraternity. Am I not Preggst, captain of the Astarte, and bloodiest villain in all the 7 seas? Bloody Ezek, they call me. And you think I'll tell you where I hid my treasure?"
The tribunal of the Corsairs' fraternity murmured at this. Preggst was indeed all he claimed. The judge, One-Eyed William, slammed his fist on the table, and silence was restored.
"Shut your mouth, Preggst! You didn't pay the fraternity its rightful share, and that means only one thing. You'll hang by the neck from a yardarm, you scurvy cur! Here's the rope twisted by Satan himself. You threaten me, Will? Many a man better than yourself has lived to regret holding a cutlass in my face. You'll be begging for mercy, mark my words."
That shook One-Eyed William, and no mistake. Danny waved his hook in the air and shouted,
"Preggst was always a loudmouth. The law says we hang him."
The jurors took up the cry,
"Hang him!"
It was Preggst's turn to slam his fist on the table. He threw back his head and roared with laughter.
"You fools! You want to kill what will never die? Try it!"
Once more, the assembled Corsairs murmured. There was unease in the air. They remembered what happened to Chuck, the gizzard slitter, the man who opened his mouth once too often. It was night, and a bitter wind whipped the New England coast. Snug inside the Dead Horse Inn, one of the Astarte's men was talking. His name was Chuck, and his subject was black magic. He told stories of human sacrifices, voodoo rites, and zombies. He told a tale of a time when their luck was down and they were holed up in a Florida swamp. Preggst went missing. When he returned, he shouted, "'Tis the devil that guides us now, me hearties!" Whether that was true or not, the Astarte began taking loot after juicy loot. The favorite song of the Astarte's men, "Crash the Bones," was replaced by a new one. "A skull, go to port, sabre, to starboard. Pass over that will, and with death you'll deal. If you cut a rope, cut the right, I hope, or then, I don't mind, the death you will find." The next day, as you may have guessed, Chuck's body was found with a dagger plunged between his shoulder blades. Chuck's face was fixed in a ghastly grin. Molten lead had been poured down his throat. Whatever way things happened next, and I don't have the details, Preggst was with us again, and we set sail for Florida. We anchored the frigate not far from New Orleans. Taking a few trusted companions with him, Preggst set off into the swamp. They carried large wooden chests with them. 2 days later, we heard shots being fired and screams. Preggst arrived soon after that and claimed they'd been attacked by alligators. He alone managed to escape with his life. He went on to say that the time had come to share out the spoils of our many loots. I was given command of the Astarte, while Preggst handed 3 chests over to the crew. The chests were full of gold and precious gemstones. The rum flowed that night, and the stars shone bright. All at once, I noticed a tall man dressed in black. Preggst introduced him to me.
Here's a hearty mate. You can call him Keith. Many a tale he could tell." Pregged laughed loudly and held up a roll of parchment. "And his hideout, none better." The parchment fell to the ground, partly unrolling. I noticed what seemed to be a map of underground tunnels, a veritable maze of caverns. Pregged continued, "I'm giving up the pirate's life. The estate is in your hands now, my lad. She's a fine ship, and my reputation goes with her. Should any man call me coward, then break his head for me. I'm leaving you only because I found a treasure more precious than the purest of gold." Keith spoke to him then. "It is midnight. They are ready, and we must go." The stranger turned his cold eyes on me and said in a soft, chilling voice, "Sometimes Pregged talks too much. Forget what he just said, and maybe you'll live." The fellow's words froze the marrow in my bones, and it was all I could do to mumble, "I'll not breathe a word." The canoe slid away into the night. Their torches disappeared in the distance of the swamp. My snoring companions didn't hear the insidious rhythm of far-off drums.